At first, nothing seems different to her. Life continues as usual. Conversations still happen, distractions fill the space, and the ego quietly whispers that she made the right choice. This is the deceptive calm, the phase where absence has not yet revealed its true weight, because when someone genuine leaves, their absence does not strike immediately. It lingers, it waits, and then it unfolds. What she initially experiences is not loss, but relief shaped by illusion. The mind protects itself by justifying the decision. It tells her that you are replaceable, that something better will come along, that what you offered was ordinary. But time has a way of dismantling these convenient narratives. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the emotional environment begins to shift. It starts in silence. The absence of your consistency, your attention, your depth, these are not things easily replicated. She begins to notice that what once felt natural now feels missing. Conversations lack substance, connections feel transactional. And in those quiet, unguarded moments, a realization begins to form, not as a dramatic epiphany, but as a growing discomfort she cannot ignore. This is where the psyche turns inward. The same mind that once justified your absence now begins to question it. She revisits memories, not out of nostalgia, but out of confusion. Why does everything feel less meaningful? Why does no one quite measure up? And the answer, though difficult to accept, becomes increasingly clear. You were not ordinary, you were foundational. The realization does not come as a single moment of clarity, but as a slow collapse of illusion. What she dismissed, she now understands. What she overlooked, she now values. And what she lost, she can no longer deny. Because the truth is simple and often arrives too late. You never recognize the value of something real while your ego is still louder than your awareness. And once that realization begins to take shape, something even more unsettling follows. The mind, in its attempt to restore balance, starts making comparisons, not consciously at first, but subtly, almost instinctively. Every new interaction becomes a quiet evaluation. Every new person is measured against a standard she never fully acknowledged when she had it. This is where the psychological tension deepens, because what she is comparing now is not surface level attraction or temporary excitement. It is depth, consistency, emotional presence. The very qualities that once felt ordinary begin to reveal themselves as exceptionally rare. And this creates a kind of internal conflict, because what she once dismissed is now the very thing she cannot seem to find again. She may meet people who are more exciting, more available, or even more aligned on the surface. But something is always missing. There is a lack of grounding, a lack of sincerity, a lack of that quiet strength you carried without needing recognition. And the more she searches, the clearer it becomes that what you offered was not easily replicated. It was an expression of who you were, not something you performed. This is the paradox of human perception. We often fail to recognize value when it is stable, when it is consistent, when it does not demand attention. The psyche is drawn to intensity, to novelty, to emotional highs. But over time, it begins to crave something deeper, something real. And by the time that craving becomes undeniable, the standard has already been set by you. Now every new connection feels incomplete, not because others are lacking entirely, but because they are being unconsciously compared to a version of authenticity she can no longer access. And this is where the weight of loss becomes undeniable, not through memory alone, but through repeated disappointment. Because once someone experiences something real, even if they didn't value it at the time, nothing artificial will ever fully satisfy them again. And as these comparisons quietly intensify, the ego begins to lose its grip. What once felt like certainty now turns into doubt. And that doubt slowly transforms into something far heavier: regret. Not the kind that announces itself loudly, but the kind that settles deep within the psyche, growing stronger with time. You see, the ego thrives on control. It convinces us that walking away is power, that detachment is strength, that choosing ourselves without reflection is always justified. But what it often disguises is impulsiveness, emotional avoidance, and an inability to recognize true value in the present moment. And when reality begins to contradict the ego's narrative, it doesn't collapse immediately. It resists, it defends, it rationalizes, but eventually it weakens. She begins to revisit the past, not through the lens of pride, but through the lens of awareness. Moments she once overlooked now carry weight. Conversations she dismissed now echo differently. Your patience, your restraint, your presence, things that once felt expected, now reveal themselves as conscious choices you made, not obligations you fulfilled. This is where regret becomes unavoidable, because it is no longer about losing a person. It is about realizing the depth of what was lost. And more importantly, recognizing her role in that loss. The mind starts to question its own decisions. Why did I push that away? Why didn't I see it then? These are not easy questions because they require confronting the self, not blaming the other. And this confrontation is uncomfortable. It dismantles the illusion of control the ego once maintained. It forces her to see that what she thought was empowerment may have actually been self sabotage, that what she believed was replaceable was in fact rare. Regret, in this sense, is not punishment. It is clarity arriving too late. It is the mind finally aligning with truth after it can no longer change the outcome. Because in the end, the most painful realizations are not about what we lost, but about how carelessly we let it go. And when regret settles in, it does not remain contained. It begins to spread, quietly at first, into every corner of her inner world. Because once the illusion breaks, it cannot be restored to its original form. What follows is not just emotional discomfort, it is a deeper psychological destabilization. From the outside, very little may seem to change. She continues her routines, maintains appearances, perhaps even convinces others that she is moving forward without difficulty. But internally, something is shifting. The certainty she once carried begins to erode. The confidence that came from believing she made the right choice is now replaced with hesitation, even self-doubt. This is what happens when the psyche is forced to confront a truth it tried to avoid. The mind can no longer rely on the same narratives that once provided comfort. It starts to question not just the decision, but the judgment behind it. If I was wrong about that, what else have I been wrong about? And this question is far more unsettling than the loss itself, because now it is not just about you. It is about her relationship with herself. The identity she built around being in control, being certain, being emotionally detached, begins to crack. And in its place, there is confusion, a sense that something fundamental has been misunderstood. Emotionally, this creates instability. The highs feel less convincing, the distractions less effective. There is a lingering weight that follows her, even in moments that should feel light. And that weight is not just sadness. It is the quiet awareness that something real was lost and cannot be easily replaced. This is the collapse that few people talk about. Not dramatic, not visible, but deeply internal. A slow unraveling of certainty, driven by the realization that the foundation it stood on was flawed. Because when you lose something real, you don't just lose the person, you lose the version of yourself that failed to recognize their value. And it is often at this stage, when the internal collapse becomes too heavy to ignore, that the impulse to return begins to surface, not as a grand declaration, but as a quiet urge to reconnect, to revisit, to somehow restore what was lost. Because the mind, when faced with regret and instability, naturally seeks resolution. She may begin to reach out, directly or indirectly, a message, a reaction, a subtle attempt to re enter your awareness. On the surface, it may appear as renewed interest, even affection, but beneath it lies something more complex. It is not purely love that drives this return. It is the discomfort of loss, the desire to escape the consequences of her own realization. Psychologically, this is an attempt to rewrite the past, to go back to a moment where things still had potential, where the outcome was not yet fixed. But what she fails to fully grasp is that time does not simply reverse, and people do not remain unchanged after being forced to grow through absence. Because while she was arriving at awareness, you were moving through transformation. The silence she experienced as emptiness, you experienced as space, space to review, fold to reflect, to detach from what once held you. And in that process, you did not just heal, you evolved. The version of you that tolerated being overlooked, that offered without being valued, no longer exists in the same way. So when she reaches back, she is not meeting the same person she left behind. She is encountering someone who has redefined their worth, someone who no longer seeks validation from the very place that once dismissed them. And this creates a final, unavoidable tension, because now the roles have shifted. The access she once had effortlessly must now be earned, if it is even available at all. And often it isn't. This is the quiet finality of growth, not loud, not dramatic, but absolute. Because when someone loses you and then finds you again, they are not finding what they had, they are facing what they no longer deserve. And in the end, what remains is not the relationship itself, but the lesson it leaves behind. Because when something real is lost, truly lost, it does not simply disappear without meaning. It transforms into a reference point, a psychological marker that reshapes how she sees everything that comes after. You become, in a sense, a standard, not in an idealized or romanticized way, but in a deeply internal, almost unconscious way. Every future interaction, every connection, every emotional experience is now filtered through the awareness of what once existed and what was carelessly let go. This is not something she chooses. It is something the psyche imposes once it has encountered authenticity. And this is where the lesson becomes permanent, because it is no longer about you as a person. It is about what you represented. Stability, depth, sincerity, presence, qualities that cannot be manufactured on demand, and certainly cannot be rediscovered easily once lost. She begins to understand that real value does not announce itself loudly. It is often quiet, consistent, and easily overlooked by an untrained mind. But awareness once gained cannot be undone. And so she carries this realization forward, whether she wants to or not. It influences her decisions, her expectations, even her regrets. In some cases, it may lead to growth, a deeper appreciation for what is genuine. In others, it may lead to a quiet dissatisfaction, because what she now recognizes as meaningful is no longer within reach. This is the paradox of human experience. We often learn the most important lessons not through possession, but through loss. And the cost of that lesson is not just emotional, it is existential. It changes how we relate to others, and more importantly, how we understand ourselves. Because in losing something real, she did not just lose you, She lost the opportunity to experience that version of life again in the same way. And that is the lesson that stays. Because some people are not meant to be replaced, they are meant to be replaced. They are meant to be remembered as the moment you finally understood what real, truly was.